Hello and welcome everyone to our Intacct Basics Bootcamp for July's edition of CloudBytes, hosted by Dean Dorton. Presenting today is Matt Grimm. He is a software consultant with Dean Dorton. He will be kind of covering the Intacct Basics throughout the webinar. If you have any questions, please use the chat feature at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. We will be monitoring it throughout the presentation, and we'll make sure to share any technical questions with our presenter at the end of the session. If we do not address your question during today's presentation, contact information is included at the end of the materials, so please reach out after as needed. This webinar is being recorded and will be emailed to you by the end of the week. Thank you so much for joining us today. Do not hesitate to ask questions. And without further ado, I give you Matt Grimm.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Just getting into, as we kind of give another minute, see if there's any latecomers. Just want to add a little plug here and call out to have everybody register for our 2021 Enlighten User Conference. As mentioned, you'll be getting the slide deck at the end, and within the slide deck, you'll notice the buttons here. You'll be able to actually click those links and register. This is a great free user conference to learn a ton of material, and not just from the consulting team. You'll hear from Intacct experts and other marketplace partners. So just want to add that as a quick little plug before we jump in. And we can just get into it. So to kick it off, we have our main objectives. I just kind of want to give a high-level overview of what we're planning to cover today. Getting into kind of some of the basics, we'll navigate and learn how to use the system and the different modules, applications, and menus. From there, we'll talk a little bit about permissions, the difference between users, roles, and quick mention on how those are also impacted by the user types. And then from there, we'll get into some more advanced, but what we still consider basic features in Sage Intacct. But these are ways that you can kind of customize your system and better fit software for your business needs. And hopefully we'll have some time at the end for some questions. Okay, so jumping into some of the navigation and basics for tips and tricks. And this is going to be more related to the individual user. And the first bit we'll go into here will be kind of the main menu. And this is what you're going to see as your company displayed and the logo. If you're working in a multi-entity environment, this is where you're going to be able to switch between entities. The main menu will also jump into user preferences a little bit. And later on, we'll talk about some of the settings that are hopefully going to help with some efficiencies. And then within the main menu, we'll also talk about how to get to help and support and kind of navigate through that as well. Okay, so let's jump into Sage Intacct and actually take a look. I'll just drag this over. So as I'm logged in, again, what I'm referencing here, when I say the main menu, is going to be this white strip right up here. Okay, so as I said, here's where you can find the company you're working in. You'll notice the logo. If you're working in a multi-entity environment, this is where you can switch between the different entities. Again, staying in the main menu, a lot of applications or websites where you sign up and you have a profile, you'll have your name listed here, but this is where you can sign out and then jump into preferences. And then from here, we'll go into a little bit later, some specific settings that hopefully will help in your day-to-day activities. Okay. The other topic I want to talk about here on this main menu is going to be the Help Center. So as I click on the Help Center, you'll notice the help. Sorry, made that go away. So you'll notice the Help Center opens up in a different web page. And from here, you can navigate, and this is a great resource if you're looking for, whether new functionality or how to do something. Sage Intacct help and support here is a great tool to jump in. You'll see the menu options here. You can go into some of the basics, break it out by application. So just kind of navigating it, it's really easy to get into and identify and find certain things. And if you're not seeing anything, one thing I want to call out is just the keyword search. So as you start typing, you'll notice that eventually a list will show up based off of what you're looking for, right? So if I needed to reverse a bill or reverse a deposit, it's nice because it has, all these words indexed, and you can do a keyword search and jump right to that page if that's what you're looking for. A couple other things that I want to call out specifically, and just to navigate to them a little bit, is going to be our community. So I like to think of the Intacct community as the Facebook of Intacct, right? This is where you can actually sign in and connect with colleagues and join groups, right? It's a great resource for, they have a huge knowledge base of articles. So if you're looking for things beyond just the kind of basics and help, this is a great resource to reach out and search for articles, other how-to information, as well as potentially log support case if needed. Okay. The last thing I want to call out in here is going to be the Learning Center, right? So this is fairly new, but you can sign in and register for Learning Center, and this is a wonderful resource for you to be able to, look into short videos, tutorials on how to do certain things, how applications work. You can also sign up for courses. They have on-demand courses, which will allow you to actually go through a course on your free time. Or if you're somebody like myself who benefits from having an instructor kind of drive and have an agenda, you can sign up for instructor-led courses as well. So very, very much recommend getting into the Learning Center and seeing what's out there. So the last thing, just on the topic of kind of the help and support, we'll drag this out of the way here. I'm just going to kind of jump into an application screen. We'll jump into adding a bill here, and just to demonstrate the tooltip help, right? I love this functionality because it allows you within, even in a data entry screen, it's a quick way if I have a question on a specific field or even a specific section. If I get into the details section, well, what can I do here? This is a quick, easy way to see, just generic quick help information on this section, right? So knowing that that's there can be very beneficial. You don't have to, go to the help center and try to navigate and find specifically what you're looking for. Some of these options exist right within the screen. All right. So jumping back to the PowerPoint, covered the main menu and some additional things within that. The next menu that we want to get into is the company menu. And this is where within your company and the applications you have and permissions you have for that user, that's where we're going to get into actually switching between applications, how to navigate back to home, and briefly talk about some favorites and bookmarks and the differences there. We'll do a quick mention on the search, and just to call this out, it's not searching for help, it's actually searching for records within the system. It's nice to be able to do this because you have the ability to search system-wide. So if you're looking for something and you're not sure if it's an adjustment versus a bill, you can search the entire system for keywords. And then from there, I just want to kind of go through some of the common design features. Sage Intacct is developed really well so that a lot of the buttons and, for example, the export, if you're looking to export something, that functionality is consistent throughout all of the applications, which makes it very easy to use. So we'll kind of point some of those out. Okay, so let's jump back in. And from here, again, what we went through prior to that was the main menu, that white strip up here, briefly talked about the help and support there. So now the company menu that I was referencing is this blue strip. So here we're going to go through some of the options. And as I talked about, this is where you would navigate the actual modules that you're getting into, right? So as I hit the applications here, this is what we consider the application switcher. And this allows me to go from, company if I'm working, in some configurations, or I can switch to the payables application. And notice as I do that, additional menu options pop up. And this is where I can actually go from, if I'm looking to configure the application itself, or I'm looking to enter bills, right? You have additional tabs up here that help you navigate into what you're looking to do. Just to call out, so within the application switcher, notice that I can drag and drop. So, if there's common applications that I work in, or if I never look at my dashboards, I can drag that to the bottom. Very easy to move these lists around and make them fit your needs. So jumping into a quick discussion on favorites and bookmarks, and I'll briefly mention the home page. So again, if I jump into an application, the bill screen here, I can jump back home. And just to call out on the home page, this is where you can actually go into some additional resources as well. Check out release notes, things like that. And some good information, easy to get to from here. And then getting into favorites and bookmarks. So if there is a common entry screen or common applications that you use, for example, if I'm, every day I do purchase requisitions, it's the most common screen I get into. Well, in order to add that to my favorites, notice these stars. I can simply click that star, and then over here is your actual list of favorites. Again, this is really great and useful if, for example, I always go and enter purchase requisitions. Or under my favorites, I had listed journal entries, right? So if I'm, every day entering or going into journal entries, I can list that as my favorites. Easy way to get into it. One thing I want to call out and point out the difference in what's nice about bookmarks compared to favorites is, so I have the journal entry screen listed under my favorites, easy to navigate, I can get here, but if I want to enter something, I have to go into the journal I'm looking for and then click the add button to add it, right? Well, there's an easy way to do that by using, so let me just jump back to the home page, bookmarks. So instead of having to do those extra clicks, I can easily save that journal entry screen under a bookmark. So that's the difference between favorites and bookmarks that I want to call out, is that additional level that you're able to save that bookmark for, right? Easy way to navigate. Okay. So just to go back to the home page here, I just briefly want to talk about some of the common design features. Again, what's nice about Sage Intacct is it's a common theme and layout throughout whatever application you get into. So just to kind of illustrate that, jumping in between, the vendors view here, you see the list, and going from vendors to customers, you're going to see the same kind of layout, same list, options, the buttons up here, whether you're adding a transaction, trying to save a transaction, adding a vendor, looking to export data, same functionality is throughout whatever module you go into, which makes it very easy to use, right? you're not getting confused on, buttons are scattered and trying to figure out how it all works. Same functionality throughout. So covering all of those, the two different menus. Next thing we want to jump into here is I just want to talk about some of the basic settings that we can use. Increasing the number of rows that you see on a screen, how you can customize the actual entries layout, make it more efficient for the information that you have to enter and potentially eliminate some fields that you don't need. Briefly talk about working in a multi-entity environment, go through a couple tips and tricks here and how you can color code and duplicate browser tabs if you're working in different entities. And then just to briefly talk about some shortcut keys. All right, so let's jump back in. And so from here, as I mentioned, in that main menu, I'm going to jump into some of the preferences here. And then from here, I just want to call out a few kind of display settings that I find beneficial, and I find that a lot of users find beneficial. For me, a personal one for me, if I'm doing a demo in this case, I prefer to have this menu option as a click, right? Whereas when I'm actually working in the system, I actually prefer to hover over the application because I know exactly where I'm going. I'm not, I'm not demoing something and I want this menu option to be held open, right? I can just hover over it and click, hover to the exact application I want to and click what I'm getting into. I don't have to click every option. That's kind of a personal preference for myself. Take some adjusting, I'm sure, if you do switch that. But then some other options that we can set here is the number of rows that you see on your lists and your entry screens. This is nice so that if you're searching for information, you don't have to click through a larger number of pages. You can say, I want to see up to 999 rows for each view that I'm looking at. Right? Makes it much easier to see a bunch of information, much more information available, instead of having to click through pages and pages and pages. If it's something where you are entering transactions and you always have to expand the line item detail, there's options where you can have that set as a default, right? So it always just kind of pops up that way, which is nice. So one thing I would recommend is going into the Help Center and look some of this preferences up, right? There's a lot out there. And then, jump into your preferences and use the tooltip help here. It'll give you a lot of information and explain what some of these settings can do. So on the topic of data entry and entering line item information, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the screen here. I'll just jump into the bill screen and act as if we were going to actually add a record here, right? One thing that I want to call out here, which is nice, is the ability to actually edit the layout here. So as I mentioned, let's say allocations, I hardly ever use this field. Well, I can drag that out of my list here so that I can narrow those fields down and hopefully speed up my data entry. Right? Or if there's fields that I always have to expand this just so I can enter the information, I can add them up here if I wanted to. I can rearrange them. So if I wanted, location in front of department, great, easy way to customize this layout for my personal use, right? Again, this is, more driven towards individual user settings. Another thing that I want to briefly talk about are just some keyboard shortcuts that I find are potentially helpful, right? And some of those, may not be helpful. I'm actually going to pull over the actual help page here and just kind of show some of these. You may not be aware of these, but to me, if I'm entering a lot of information, it helps me from having to go, move my hand from keyboard to mouse, some of these keystrokes, some simple things as selecting a space bar. So in the field back here, the 1099, notice that's a checkbox. Well, instead of having to move my hand to the mouse, I can simply hit the space bar when I'm on that field. Right, so I just want to call out the shortcut keys. I recommend that you jump into the Help Center and pull this page up. There's a bunch of different shortcut keys that will hopefully help expedite some of the data entry and customize the layout for your personal use. Okay. So jumping back into the PowerPoint here, able to cover some of the basics, the menus. Then the next thing I want to jump into is briefly talk a couple of slides on permissions. So getting into the permissions, some may think it's pretty obvious, right? This is where we define the access and give functionality, to certain users for each application. One thing I want to talk about here there's kind of two different sections that you assign permissions to. Under the activities and lists, this is where you can basically say, users have access to see lists and views. They're able to add, edit, and delete transactions. You'll see some other, specific settings towards, certain applications, but those are kind of the general settings. When it comes to reports, there's the option of run, and this, giving that option, that permission to users is going to include the ability to view, print, and export the reports, right? So when it comes to the permissions, and I'm trying to add, I have a nice example here, but there's an impact for the user type. So as a user, if I'm trying to add a customer and for some reason it's not letting me, try to keep in mind that it's restricted based off the user type. So if I have a user type of employee, I simply might just need to upgrade my user type to a business user type. And that will allow me then to add, right? So it may look like I have permissions, but for some reason I'm still restricted. Keep in mind that user type might have an impact on that. So next topic I want to get into with permissions, I want to talk about role-based versus user-based permissions. And just a quick comparison here, role-based versus user-based roles, you can actually assign the permissions to a specific role and then assign that role to multiple users. Okay, so where this becomes very handy is if you have a large organization, multiple people within the same role, you don't have to maintain each individual user's permissions. You can simply set up a role structure, have a number of users within a role, and then simply manage the role permissions, right? Keep in mind, you can also stack roles. So if you have a user who jumps between accounts payable, accounts receivable, they can have both roles, right? So it's not limited to a single role. So you'll find in most cases, it's going to be best to set your system up for role-based permissions, right? And you may be thinking, well, we already have the user-based permissions established. It's too late to change. It's not. You can always go back into the system and change that setting, which will automatically create roles for each user. But then you can go through, create your role structure, assign the proper users, and then eliminate those auto-created roles. So you're still able to do that. And very recommended, makes it much more easier to maintain, right? You can do it by role instead of having to go to each individual user. And it allows you to kind of scale and gives you that flexibility.
Hey, Matt, we just received a question. If having more than one role, the permissions will be the least restrictive if one role gives permission and another does not?
Well, I think the answer to that would be, say I have access, within one role, and that user has, a specific user has two roles assigned to them, essentially, right? One role has access and the other one doesn't. That user will still receive access to that function based on the one role that does have access. I hope that answers the question.
Right. Yes, that answered the question.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so this next section, what I want to get into is what we still consider some basic Intacct functionality. Maybe they're newer features or just kind of lesser known features. Checklists are fairly new, and I find them to be underutilized. But checklists are a way for you to manage process, assign tasks, and give you a visual, right? So I'll just briefly talk on these. And then just to briefly talk through some of the smart actions. Great way to help customize your system and build functionality into your system for whatever business needs you have. Okay, so we'll briefly talk through some of those. And then I actually want to get into a demonstration and go through ways that we can customize the system fairly easily. And then go through an actual scenario where we're going to customize add a custom field, customize views, and then run an import and talk further on imports. And so let's jump into checklists, right? So as I mentioned, checklists give you the ability to kind of manage a process, outside of the system. That processes like month end, year end, closing. If you have a process outside of the system that you're tracking right now, vendor onboarding, a lot of times it's manually tracked. You lose track of where things are. This is where checklists provide you the functionality, and getting into the checklist category, this is where you can kind of group your checklist. So if it's month end or vendor onboarding, customer onboarding, things like that, you can create categories that allows you to group those together by activities or who's responsible. And then getting into the assignments, this is kind of the core of it, right? This is where you're really adding the activity. You're tracking that activity. You can assign who's responsible, give it start date, due date, and provide statuses. A lot of these are user defined, so you can build these out to work within your organization. And then just to briefly talk about the checklist options. This is where you're able to control who can actually make updates to the checklist and assignments within them. Okay, so again, checklists I feel are a great way to help track these processes that have timeline and you want to keep on a schedule. Great way to put that into the system and then provide a visual as well. So now getting into some of the smart actions. Briefly want to go through smart links. There's two different types of smart links. As you see here, a smart click, right? This is something where you can embed into a screen, right? They call it the form object, but it's based off of a condition. So let's say we had a custom checkbox on the vendor setup page, right? And that checkbox determines whether we order or reorder from this customer and whether they have a website that we order from. Great. If that checkbox is checked, it's going to provide a link that takes you directly to that vendor's ordering screen, right? So then I can just jump to that page and enter my order and be done. And keep in mind, so this will actually take you to a new browser tab, whereas a smart fetch is slightly different because it actually embeds the website, the web page that you're going to within the Sage Intacct page. Okay. Quick examples, adding stock ticker of company, something cool information that you want to have right in the Sage Intacct, setup page, great. Or shipping statuses, things like that. nice to kind of embed some of those things right in Sage Intacct so you're not jumping between different browser tabs, or even to jump to a different browser tab on a smart click. So the next smart action that I briefly want to talk about here are smart rules. This is really nice way for you to customize your system so that you can make fields required. It's going to throw warnings or errors. You can prevent things from saving if you wanted to. And the example here is if you have, somebody who is always creating new customers and they never put the address in, well, you can make that field required, right? So if they try to save a record and they don't have the address information filled out, it's going to throw an error message. So a nice way for you to customize that functionality and fit your business need. And the last smart action that I'm going to talk about here is a smart event. And this is kind of that next level. It's not going to throw a warning error message. It's going to actually have an event that is triggered off of certain conditions. The example here is if, sales rep enters a quote for anything greater than $5,000, it'll automatically trigger an event that is an email going to the sales manager, right? So if that's something internally that you have to, if you enter a quote for over 5,000, you're supposed to email the manager, great. You can set up the system, create a smart event so that it does it for you automatically. And just a plug here that again, you'll get the slide deck and there's a link built in here that you can click on and it'll take you to a YouTube video and you can see some examples and more information on smart events and smart rules. Okay, so keeping that in mind. Next topic I want to jump into is imports. And I briefly want to talk about templates. There are a large number of templates out there. A lot of times when you think of import, you're thinking of just specific to transactional data. It's not just for transactional data. As useful as those are and time saving, there's also imports and templates for setup information such as vendors and customers. One thing that is really nice about these templates that you can download right from your system is that they automatically include any customizations that you have. So if we add a custom field, those are included when you do the template or download from that template page. And then just one call out, the permissions, I just want to mention here, people get confused sometimes that you're looking for a permission that says import or templates. It's listed under company setup checklists and just give the run permission. And then you should have access. So briefly talk about a quick flow, right? So download the latest template. I want to mention that because you could have custom fields or anything custom added. So you want to make sure you have the latest and greatest. Simply add the data that you're trying to import, save it as a CSV, and then run the import in Intacct, right? It's nice, the system will generate, once you run the import, it'll kind of provide you number of imports that were successful, number of failed, provide you, if there's errors, it'll provide you spreadsheets with those errors, as well as send you an email with the detail for that. All right, so the next thing I actually want to get into a little demonstration, and I put together kind of a quick scenario here. And the scenario is that, we acquire a new division and we need to get the customers from that division into Intacct. And one thing that we want to keep track of is the old customer ID, right? So the demo that we're going to get into, I'm going to go through adding a custom field. I'm going to show how we can modify views, the customer views, to include that custom field. And then we're actually going to step into the import function and import some new customers. Okay. Okay, so going with that scenario, as I mentioned, we have to jump in and add a new custom field. So in my menus, I'm going to jump into customization services, and here you're going to see custom fields, right? As that loads, right? So you'll get a list of custom fields. And just to kind of show how simple these are to add, you'll notice it's step 1 of 3. So there's not a ton of information. It's that easy. So from here, this is where we're going to determine where we're adding this new field, right? In our case, we're going to add it to the customer. Jump to next. What type of field are we adding? Right, so in our case, we're just going to do a simple text. But there's a huge list here. It can be a URL, checkboxes, right? Jump to the next. So here we give it, label ID, call it old customer. ID. Okay. Out of that, we can provide it a length. If we want to limit it to, 15 characters, if we know that's what it was. Quick description if we wanted to. Simple next. So on this final option here, this is where we can determine whether that field is required. All the other customers that we're going to set up may not come from the old system, so we don't want to make it required, right? So you can hide it, just different options here. So from where we want this field to show up, what's nice is you can actually hit this drop down, and based off of that first selection, we determined it was going to be associated to the customer. Right, so this gives us different options. Do we want it in the general information or additional information? Do we just want it listed on the, the customer main section there? So we can choose where we want it. In this case, we just select customer, right? And if I want to add a section, I can simply say, additional fields here, and that will actually add a section to the customer setup page. Do that for this example. So then it's that easy. I simply hit done, save. Now, just for the sake of demo purposes, I've already added this custom field. So I'm going to jump back into my list here. Right, so we already have that added. Okay. So with that added now, I'm actually going to jump into the customer's setup page and click add here. So this is where we can actually see the custom field added. And it's nice because in the system, this is where I told it to add it, right, under the customer section. And it looks generic. Users most of the time have no idea that it's a custom field, right? And just to kind of point out, if I were to add that, type in a random, a new section, it would add it below here. Okay. So now we have this field here. Again, sticking with the scenario, we added the custom field. Now I want to kind of demonstrate how we can modify these views. So notice right now, I don't see that field. Well, I can go to Manage Views, create a new view. And what's really nice here is it's going to put a little red box next to the custom field here. So it kind of stands out a bit. But this is where I'm just going to select that additional field. Maybe I want to add more information, take other information off. This is where I can customize my view. Right? Options, and easy just to step through. Let's say I wanted this new custom field to be next to the big system ID. I want to see the old ID next to it. You can rearrange your columns. Third option here allows you to apply additional filters. So if I want a custom view that only looks up for certain territories, things like that, I can add the territory field and then filter up off that information. Fourth option here is setting sorting, right? So you can sort by whichever field, ascending, descending, high to low. Right. Final option here is where we essentially name that view. So I'm just going to call it my view. And if I want other people to be able to see this view, I can select deploy. Or if I just want to keep this is my personal view, something I do every day, great. I don't select that. Just hit save. Again, common functionality in layout. So I may have missed something. Thankfully, I already have the view built out. So now here I have my old customer ID, right? So this is my personal view that I built out, and I can simply click on that, and I can build out a large list of views depending on my needs. Okay, so notice here, that's that custom field. So following along with that scenario, now that we have the custom field added, we have customized our views to include the old customer ID. Now I want to run the import. So let's say we were able to download the information, get it into spreadsheet. I want to step into company setup, import data. And here, I'm just going to reference this, all of these import buttons, right? These are, setup, transactional. All of these import buttons have templates that you can download. And in our case, we're downloading the customer template, right? And we want to make sure that we get the latest and greatest. You can see here that I have done this a couple times. But just to kind of pull up that template and talk through and illustrate how nice these are, within the template, because we got the latest and greatest, it has our custom field, right? But then notice on the second row, what's really nice is it gives you a description of that specific field. It'll tell you whether it's required, the type of field, character length. This way you're not kind of going into it blind and you're trying to import things that aren't going to work. You can see the description in that information for what you have to actually enter. Okay. The other thing that I want to call out is, let's say you were able to dump a lot of this information out from the old system, and there's certain things that you don't want to import, certain rows. Using a hashtag, so if we had this information filled out, using a hashtag here will prevent that row from being imported, right? So in this case, that row would not import, row 4 would, row 5 would not. That hashtag tells the system, ignore this row. Okay. So once we have all the information filled out, I'm just going to pull up I'll actually import here. Great, we have this information filled out. Save it as a CSV, right? So knowing that we're going to be saving as CSV, things you want to keep in mind, don't use commas, right? Try to minimize that, prevent errors. And then from there, once we have that information, we can simply run the import. And again, I'm demoing customer setup. This can be transactional, great way to save time. But running this import going into, right, we're going to select our file that we have populated, make sure the date format is accurate for what we have set. You want to make sure that you have your email here because the system will kick off an email with the information if you have errors. So I'm just going to run the import here quick, and oh, we have a failure. But we had 6 successful ones. Great. So you can download that file, and it'll tell you, just while that opens, So it's going to show you exactly what failed. Oh, John Smith. Well, okay, let me go back and see what was wrong with that. And just 1 second, I'm opening my email. Great, I have an email for that failure. And just to call out, when you're going through this error list here, it's best to work from bottom up, right? So if I had multiple errors, start at the bottom. And in this case, it's telling you that John Smith is not unique. Okay, so as I go back in, I can go back in and correct those errors. And in this case, since I already have it set up as a demo, I'm going to go back into my file. And let's say, okay, John Smith, I have John. Oh, it was supposed to be Jake, right? So that's why I had John there. So I'm going to run the import again. And just to make sure that these don't get imported, I put a hash next in row A or column A. And then I updated John Smith to Jake. Great. I can run that customer import again for my new file. Right, so I saved it as corrected. Run that import. Fantastic, right? So great way to utilize these import functions and the templates to push information in. A lot of information, whether it's customers, if you're somebody who's always entering transactions, or let's say you have month end, you have to do a series of journal entries in every single month. You can easily have download a template for your journal entries, fill out that template, and then run the import at month end and save a ton of time. Right. So now as I go into just to show customers, right? So my latest and greatest list of customers has been imported and includes that custom field that we just added. So that information is included and now available within the system. Okay, so quick run through on that scenario, some more advanced tips and tricks. Just rounding off, I want to leave some time for any questions out there.
So the one question we've gotten is the customization services an add-on? I don't have it on my end.
I believe and I may be corrected here, but I believe customizations are core feature.
Hey, Matt, this is Philip. It is customization services are included with the core. It could be a case if you don't see it where you either don't have security rights to it or you may have platform services.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
And it could be either one of those. So,
right.
But it normally is included.
Yep, so it should be included. And then just to add on to that, yep, check user types again. Sometimes it may look like you have permissions, but user type doesn't allow it. Yep.
We definitely encourage all kinds of questions. We've got a full host of Intacct professionals ready and waiting.
Yep. And just while people, hopefully thinking of questions, just want to call out upcoming CloudBytes. Again, you'll get the slide deck and you'll be able to register, right from here. And another brief, plug on the Enlighten. Don't forget to register for that as well.
We just received a question. Can an import be done into a checkbook for bank statement items?
Yep, let me just pulling up Intacct here. And just to kind of pull up the import data. Yeah, so if you don't have a direct feed, where is Banquet? Right, so if you don't have a direct feed, you can download the template and get credit card transactions and import through that. And with these templates, I highly recommend, just coming in and even just looking through some of these might trigger a, idea of, oh, we can import, inventory items or random things that you're not thinking of currently off the top of your head. There's a huge list of importing budgets.
Would the import for the checkbook be just for bank recs, or will a cash entry be made with another account?
When you say cash entry, I guess, are you looking for like I mean, there's another, if you're looking to import other receipts, there is other receipts template that is out there. If that's what you're referencing.
Posting a cash transaction, manual checks.
So
Philip, are you going to say something?
I was just going to say the one thing I will say is to keep in mind that if you import a general ledger entry into Intacct and you code it to the cash account, that does show up in the system. I'm not aware of an import straight into the manual checks type function. You can do the credit card import like Matt said and have it actually into a debit card that would essentially would affect the checking account. You could do the GL entries into the system, and then there is a separate import for bank reconciliations with the auto match features. And you can also import AP bills and mark them as paid in the import process.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of, was either cash receipt or but like Phil was mentioning, you could use the general journal or the journal entry import.
They said a third-party provider writes checks against their account.
I tell you what, it might do well for that person if they want to reach out to ERP support. We'll give you a freebie on this one and just kind of run through the process with you and make sure that we get the questions answered in the right way. But it sounds like there might be a lot of details there in that. So.
We received another question, though. We are adding a bill in the AP module. If the term is net 10th, it always chooses the due date of the 10th of the invoice date. So if I'm entering an invoice date of 6/30, it comes up as 6/10. I have to really watch this. Can something be entered to alert me?
Yeah, I mean, you can, this is kind of what we were talking about, some of those, smart rules. If, we build those conditions, it'll warn you or throw an error. Smart event would allow you to receive an email based off of certain conditions.
Is Smart Rules part of the basic package?
Yeah, I believe that would be included in your custom services or platform services.
Is there a way to have a journal entry to upload in the draft status, not submitted?
Yeah, you should be able to do that. Getting into the imports, as I kind of pointed out, they list out the different. I'm just trying to pull this up actually right now. They list out that different functionality and kind of rules behind the fields, and there should be a status field with being able to select draft versus submitted. So I just actually quickly downloaded that and that template. So for the user who was asking that, right here, you can see that it lists it out. So you would just have to enter, and just to point this out, you want to make sure you type that exactly as it's listed up here.
Well, that is almost all the time we have. So if anybody has any last minute questions, otherwise, I would just want to remind everyone that if they can't access the community or the Learning Center, to contact Kim Denton. Also, we really hope to see everyone next month at Enlighten and at our next CloudBytes with our Release 3. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day.